All right, perfect. Hi, everyone. So my name is Mason. If you haven't met me already, I'm trying to think of the best way to introduce myself. So I've been coming to Donut.js for like 6 months now. This is my first time giving a talk here. I help run a meetup in Portland called Portland Future Leaders in Tech, which I recognize some faces from that. My background is not necessarily in web development directly. It's something that I've like branched into more recently. My background is in sociology, and I have a degree in that. So kind of my interest in getting into web development and software development is making applications and websites that help bolster like social justice, sustainability, diversity, things like that, things that are really closely in line with a lot of the values that are really close to Donut.js. I think this is a really fantastic community, and it's really awesome to be able to have the opportunity to give this talk here. And so before I get going, one thing that I think is important to kind of like use as a preface to any sort of conversation about accessibility is I'd spoken to someone a good long while ago about how most people who are into web accessibility or have like a passion or interest in web accessibility, like a lot of them have a buy-in or something that is close to them that makes them care about the subject. Like it's pretty like niche. It's a pretty, it's not necessarily a section of web development that a lot of people talk about or that enough people talk about, that I would argue, which is kind of the purpose of coming out and giving talks like this. And so I've probably primed you all to think that like, oh, I don't have a buy-in. I'm just here to talk about accessibility because I think it's really cool. I do, in fact, have a buy-in. I'm visually impaired, and I have been for all 23 years of my existence. I'm in like a weird situation where it's kind of like an invisible disability to a lot of people because I do most things normally, or at least like I live a pretty normal life compared to a lot of other people who like struggle with disabilities. But the reason for bringing that up is the fact that that is kind of like a central reason why I'm interested in accessibility, and it's also something that kind of serves as like a backdrop for everything that I do have to say about accessibility. And so you might find that a lot of parts of this talk are kind of like centered around this like background of like specific attention being drawn towards like visual things rather than a lot of other disabilities. But I do my best to go over all of them. This is kind of like a surface level talk about incorporating basic aspects of accessibility into everything you do. And with that being said, I will go ahead and jump in. So first thing to go over obviously is what accessibility is. So you have this definition here from W3. I think that the most important part to cover in this definition is these highlighted bullet points here. So making things so that people with disabilities can contribute to the web, I think, is especially important because I think that people with disabilities are often kind of marginalized or don't necessarily have like input in how things should be developed. And a lot of the time, it is something that ends up getting glossed over. You know, there's tight production deadlines. There are a lot of things to include in applications a lot of the time that are just kind of take the stage over accessibility, but incorporating these features into applications is incredibly important for a variety of reasons. So moving forward, this is kind of a lot of the different things that are important to be considerate of when developing applications with people with disabilities in mind. So we have like a really wide spectrum of different conditions that people who are using websites and applications deal with. So there's visual, and then different aspects of that. So blindness, low vision, color blindness. You have auditory, so deafness, motor, cognitive, things like that. And so there are a lot of different ways that shape and influence the way that different people with different sorts of disabilities interact with software. And so it's really important to try to develop software in a way that is accommodative to all of these different things and isn't doing anything to drive people away because they don't feel like they can use the application that is at hand. And so the range of disabilities that we are actually dealing with these sorts of things is a lot broader than I think people realize. So nearly 1 in 5 people in the United States has a disability, which is a really, really high number actually. Especially considering, like, look at how many people are in this room. I mean, obviously that's not a representative sample of like the sorts of people that have a disability because it's spread all across different demographics, but that is a really huge section of the population. Encompasses a lot of people who have vision problems, a lot of people who have hearing problems, and as technology becomes a more and more integral part of life, just in the sense that everything that we do is online now. Everybody has to use the internet to pay bills. Everybody uses the internet to get the weather. Everybody uses the internet to sign up for things and register for things. Now, even getting healthcare is like largely done through the internet. So when you aren't necessarily accommodating for these things a lot of the time, that is kind of hindering the user experience for a lot of these people, and it's really, really important to be considerate of people who are dealing with these sorts of things, because it does cover a really, really broad section of the population. And moving forward, another thing to consider is the fact that that's only really covering like the United States population. That's 1 in 5 Americans who have a disability, but ultimately the stretch or the reach of the internet is global. So when you factor in the amount of people globally who have disabilities, it ends up being a really, really high number. So that's kind of the who and the why of the conversation that's being had tonight. And chances are the way that accessibility is built into the functionality of your website, it can have a really big influence on the way that people interact with it. Sorry, I totally lost my place on this slide, but yeah, it's very important to consider the fact that we're talking about a really, really large audience of people who are using the internet, and the user base of people who are using any sort of application is really, really large. So one thing that is important to consider is the fact that there have been a lot of really big accessibility breakthroughs in the last several years. So one of the most important is the ability to zoom and the ability to have things read to you through your computer. Those sorts of things have been built into operating systems across the last few years, and it's really awesome. Before, there used to be this really like arbitrary, antiquated software. You had things like Zoom Text and JAWS, which I would say are becoming like less and less prominent, because now you can just hit Command and Control and plus, and suddenly you're zooming in on your screen, and it's awesome. It makes a really, really big difference for people who have vision problems. Voiceover is like another really big thing. Voiceover really has fundamentally changed the way that a lot of people with visual disabilities interact with smartphones. The same case applies with Siri and Google Voice. People are finding newer and better ways to interact with their phones that don't necessarily require dependence upon one sense. That's a really cool thing. So a lot of people consider these technologies to just be like a basic superfluous part of the operating system, but there are big chunks of the population who are really, really reliant upon these sorts of things, and it's really cool that they exist now. And so when it comes to making our sites more accessible, we don't actually necessarily have to be accessibility experts. There are a lot of really easy things that can be done that have a big impact on the ways that people interact with websites. So first thing that is important to consider is your body text. So I've definitely been to a lot of websites where you have this massive heading, this big old H1 guy, and then right below that, it's like this 8-point body, and suddenly I'm like smashing the Command plus like 6 or 7 times to get it to be like a readable size. And so having a body text that is the appropriate size can definitely have a big impact. And it's really easy to play around with how the components on your website shift around when you practice zooming with Command plus or Control plus if you're on Windows. And another big part is, and one that you could probably guess is important based off of the screen that's right next to me, is having closed captions and transcripts for audio files. So if you have videos on your website, making sure that you have a transcript or closed captions or something where people who struggle with like deafness or hearing issues are able to subscribe to that content without necessarily having to be fully dependent upon listening to the video. Those sorts of things are also pretty easy to implement, and they also have a big they also make a world of difference for people who struggle with those issues. And then so moving forward, you can see here are some other examples of ways that you can factor in accessibility. So color and contrast is another big aspect of it. You have a lot of people who struggle with color blindness, and a lot of people who it can just generally be hard to read things when it's, I don't know, like a blue on a blue or like an orange on an orange. It's just a matter of good design practice. That doesn't even necessarily cater directly to accessibility, but it's a big important part of it regardless. Another thing to consider is with timers and things like that. A lot of the time, I'm sure you're familiar with boxes popping up where it's like, you have 10 seconds to click the OK button or we're going to log you out of your bank account and you're going to have to reset your password because you left your screen open for 10 seconds too long. Making sure that people have enough time to be able to click those buttons, people with motor disabilities, that sort of thing is really important as well. And then there are obviously some other bullet points as well. Just generally be considerate and conscious of how you're implementing design choices, and you will be golden. Another important thing that can be really helpful is leaving feedback for developers and suggestions and recommendations for increased accessibility features. Those sorts of things can be really helpful too, because I know that I have not necessarily been the best in including accessibility features into my applications at all times, but if I had something deployed and somebody left a comment was like, hey, I struggle with this problem, or somebody I know struggles with this problem, if you could update this to where it's more accommodative, I would be really happy that somebody pointed that out to me, because I don't think that anybody has this ill intention where they intentionally make their website not accessible or not usable by the entire population. So it's important to consider what you can do to just raise a message or be an advocate for people with disabilities, in the sense that we can all play a little bit of a part in making the web more accessible as a whole. And so that kind of brings me to inaccessible design choices. And this is largely just the inverse of everything that has been said in the last two slides. So disabling zoom in any capacity is not awesome. Really bright backgrounds or things that include like really, really bright flashing strobe lights without any sort of warning to the user. All of those things can cause really, really big problems for people who have certain conditions. And it can just also be like grating to the eyeballs, which I'm sure nobody really loves, but I still managed to stumble across these things on the internet regardless. So these sorts of things are all important to be considerate of. Just avoid doing things that are, I don't know, like I said, the inverse of the last two slides. Moving on, here are some final takeaways. So I think at this point, a big part of the talk has been talking about things to do or not do. But one important thing that I want to point out is the fact that most people aren't accessibility experts. I'm not an accessibility expert by any means. I have this one experience that I've lived through, and I apply it to my experience as a web user and as a web developer. But I know that I can try my best to make things accessible. I know I can be open-minded about accessibility. And those sorts of things make a world of difference. Nobody's perfect, and the web is hard. It's just important to have an open mind about these sorts of things and to do our best to make all users feel welcome and to act as an advocate for people with disabilities. And furthermore, embracing accessibility, like I touched on before, is a really important form of advocacy, and doing so really helps out a lot of people who could use some additional voices on their side. And when we all pay attention to accessible design practices, it really helps out a really big section of the population, and that, in my opinion, is a really big form, or it's a really key pillar of social justice that we should all be focused on. So that's the end of, oh, never mind, I forgot I put this slide in. So I have actually started working on a site. I was originally going to be called Accessibility Accelerated, which I thought was a way cooler title than Accessibility Kickstart, but then I Googled it and found out that Accessibility Accelerated has in fact been co-opted by the United Nations already. And I cannot afford to get a cease and desist letter, so I had to change it. So this is currently a work in progress. I literally started it like this weekend. I was kind of hoping to have a cool homepage mocked up that would at least look somewhat visually appealing and not like there's 3 lines on a screen. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes. You know, I've got my config files and stuff set up. But the main goal is that this is going to look cool eventually, and it's going to be a really helpful resource and tool eventually once it's put together. It's built with React and Gatsby, which I'm sure we have a lot of fans of in here. But if you have any interest in contributing or using the site, be sure to reach out to me, and I could probably use some help putting this together. My hope is that it becomes a really quick one-stop shop for people who want to be able to go to a website and click, oh, I want to help people who have issues seeing, and then they click the seeing button or this big eyeball button or whatever CSS magic gets slipped in there, and then they can go to a page that has all of these really helpful drag and drop things that you can just kind of put into your code to help people out. So if you are interested in learning more about that, chat with me. Or if you just want to connect, chat with me. Here's how you can do it. My email, Twitter, GitHub, etc. are all up here. I'd love to reach out and connect with any and all of you, and I definitely appreciate you all sticking around and listening to my talk. On an related side note, I'm job hunting, so if you know anything related to that, be sure to talk to me about that too. But yeah, that's my speech. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for coming to Donut. This is a really awesome community, and you're all awesome for being here.